are just joining us on Facebook, I'm Lauren Van Hemert from RDU on Stage, and I am here with the lovely Aurelia Belfield, who has taken over our Instagram today, and I've loved the postings leading up to this event. And so we're going to talk about some of the posts as well. But welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them. If you're watching on Aurelia's watch party or you're watching on my personal page, I don't necessarily see those comments. So comment or add your questions to the RDU on Stage Facebook page or Facebook comments, and then I can see them and address them, because a lot of times I see the comments afterwards. But you wear many hats. You are a producer, a director, a theater maker, an artist. I mean, you've just got a lot of balls that you are juggling in the air.
I feel like you have to. I feel like you have to make art. You have to be the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker all smushed together.
I love that. But I want to talk, I mean, I want to spend this time talking about where we are currently and how we got to this moment, and then where we go from here as a community. I know there's a lot of theater companies kind of grappling with this question of where they go from here. And so I think we're at this really interesting time. We have no theater right now, so we have time to figure this stuff out.
Yes, we have plenty of time to talk about it and figure it out and be better by the time we get back.
So in your experience as a director, producer, theater maker, can you speak to some of the inequities that exist in our Triangle theater community from across the board, from funding perspective, a casting perspective, just a structural perspective?
Sure. I think that there's a lot of great art in this area for starters. We have a plethora of people that are into producing interesting work. And I think that for the most part, the inequities are stemming from implicit unconscious bias. You don't see a lot of Black bodies on stage. People will tell you that that's because they're not showing up to the auditions, but are we doing outreach? Are we doing engagement? Are we trying to make a point to have Black and brown bodies on stage? Are we making it a point to have Black and brown directors, producers, artistic directors, all of that? And that's just something that you don't see a lot of. You don't see a ton of Black people on boards here, and when you do, it's one or two folks, and that's about it. And usually they are tasked with doing diversity and engagement and not quite as involved in, let's say, choosing a season or any of the things that hold a little bit more weight.
I agree. I think I've been shocked over the last couple of weeks as I've looked at the makeup of certain theater boards, how few people of color and how few Black artists, Black theater makers are sitting on boards. There's just not a lot of it. And there's certainly not a lot of Black and brown decision makers in the mainstream theaters.
No, there's not.
Some of the, you post a question on Instagram today, which I love. Your question was, what do we mean when we say equity, parity, and justice? Another buzzword I've heard, particularly at SETC when I attended that conference back in February, there was a lot of talk about EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion. Are these the same things? And what do these words mean for theaters in practice? What do the theaters need to know about this or consider as they are moving forward?
So they are all part of the same sort of umbrella of social justice in general, right? Equity, diversity, inclusion, and it's all about having access. Do people of color have access to these decision-making roles? Do people have color? Do people of color have access to these spaces where they are highly visible? Are they highly visible to audiences in a positive way? Or are they always tragic or always scary? Do they have, are they holding visible and important roles on your tech crews? Like, do you have Black designers? Do you have Black technical directors? Do you have, even if they're not Black, do you have people that know how to light Black skin? Do you have people that know how to do Black hair? And are you using those inequities as an excuse to perpetuate even more inequity? We don't have a wig mistress that knows how to fit Black hair or Black hair or do Black hairstyles. So we can't have Black people in certain roles because the person that we have on staff can't handle it. And that is first and foremost asinine, and also really disappointing when you think about the fact that Black designers, the Black designers that are working and are out there, they have to know how to do everybody's hair. They have to know how to light everybody. They have to know how to do everybody's makeup. And for some reason, with Black and brown people, that is the expectation because you're expected to cater to a white audience, but that expectation is not there for white designers, directors, producers, because they've never had to think about it. And I think at this point, step one is you have to think about it. And you have to think about all of the layers that are involved with providing access. So it's something other than just plucking a Black person out of a crowd and saying, okay, you're going to be our costume person, or complaining that there just aren't, you can't find people that have the experience or have the know-how. Are you doing apprenticeships? Are you doing mentorships? Are you doing sponsorships? Are you doing the outreach to find the people? Because they're not going to find you.
I muted myself for a minute because my family, I told you it's going to be a high traffic area because I hit the live button. So, um, what I'm wondering though is I know a lot of our theaters right now are reassessing their seasons, reevaluating their seasons, and reading scripts, which is great. But I wonder, one conversation that I've heard come up in a lot of these interviews is, can a white playwright even write about the Black experience? I mean, you've got a big high profile play like American Son. I was shocked that the playwright of that play is white. So when you're picking seasons and you're talking about diversity, do you need to be looking at plays by Black playwrights, people of color, Black Indigenous people, or is it, can a white person even write about another?
Sure. I mean, listen, there's no rules, right? There's not a law that says that you can't write about whatever you want to write about, but the question becomes, who are you writing this for? Who is your audience? And what is this? What is your perspective? So absolutely, you can write a play. You as a white playwright can write a play and there can be Black people in it. But you also have to think about, as a white playwright, if you feel compelled to write something specifically about the Black experience, what are you trying to say?
Yes.
And why do you feel like you have to give a certain perspective when you could be writing a universal play about universal topics and just mandate that certain characters are people of color?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in making your casting decisions, it's okay to cast people of color, Black and brown artists in I don't want to say traditionally white roles, because I think part of the problem is we talk about white roles, black theater, and we never say white theater. So I mean, it's always black roles, black theater, but we're never distinguishing really white roles, white theater. So I think
But that's
that's
because white people are the default person. Like, well, the white man is the everyman, right? And so the only way that we're going to change that, and it's not something that we need to dwell on, because the only way that we can change that is to build a time machine, go back in time, and fight Christopher Columbus. Like, that's the only way that whiteness as the default is going to change. But what we can do is move forward from it and sort of dismantle that idea and what the every person looks like. First of all, there's no every person, they don't exist, right? And you have to sort of look within yourself and find where that implicit bias lives. If you have an ingenue, and this ingenue is particularly vulnerable for one reason or another in your story, and when you imagine her, she is waifish and she is blonde and she is fair skinned, and you need to sort of sit with why that is. Why is that the first thing that you think of? Why can't she be plus size? Why can't she be black or brown? Why? And sit with it, think about it, and sort of move through, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I've been sitting in the soup of racism for my entire life, and I've absorbed some of it, even though I didn't think that I did.
and that is the key, I think, to the entire having these difficult conversations, because I love my parents. I'm very close to my parents, but um, several years ago, I took a class in which it was really the first time in my adult life I ever had a courageous conversation on race. And it was weeks long. It wasn't like a 2 hour class or a 1 hour class. It was a 6 week class so we could unpack our own racism, our own bias. And it was very difficult to come to terms with the fact that although I love my parents, they raised me well. I mean, they exposed me to a lot of experiences, but a lot of the attitudes I developed growing up were inherently racist, and a lot of those attitudes came from them. And my husband and I had a long talk one night. It was like, how do we break this cycle? And that is a very difficult reality to come to as a white person. And that's where I think a lot of white people are struggling right now, because they don't want to think of themselves as bad people. They don't want to think of their parents as bad people or their grandparents as bad people. It's not that they're bad. This is what this is the attitudes, the societal attitudes we've been brought up with. And until we can come to grips with that, we can't start to change.
I think it is understanding that that is systemic racism. And we, as progressive minded people, can think that systemic racism is just the prison industrial complex or just discriminatory bank loans or anything like that. But systemic racism is also ideas. It is the entire structure of the society that we live in. And it's hard, and you're going to feel bad, and I think that is a tipping point for a lot of people, because they don't want to feel bad and they don't want to feel guilty. And in a lot of the comment sections you'll see nowadays, it's people that don't want to engage in these conversations because they feel like they shouldn't have to feel guilty for being white, and nobody's asking them to do that. If you feel guilty because of some actions that you did or some internal thoughts that you've had and never expressed, but you're sitting with that and it's making you feel bad for a reason. Like, it's like all your grandmas will say, a hit dog will holler. And you feel bad for a reason, and I'm sorry for that, but you need to sit with why that is. And it's going to be difficult, and you're going to feel badly and you're going to be uncomfortable, but growing pains are what they are. And when you get to the other side of it, you will be better and you will feel different. And honestly, your world's going to be a lot easier because you're not having to parse through these negative thoughts all of the time.
It's true. And it's okay. When we first started having these conversations a few weeks ago, um, people were, we received some backlash because people were telling us they made, first of all, that we were making him feel uncomfortable. And my response to that is tough, good. Sit in your discomfort for a minute and figure out why, or
Yeah,
don't.
I mean, a big part of this is white privilege, right? When we talk about you get to feel uncomfortable now while the world is burning, you feel uncomfortable. I get to be Black every single day, and I have been Black every single day for 33 years, and I've had to walk into rooms and be Black in front of people who did not want me to be there. I get to be uncomfortable going to Walgreens. I get to be uncomfortable getting pulled over by a police officer for a broken tail light. I get to be uncomfortable going on a date with somebody that may not be Black and wondering, do they really want to be here? I get to be uncomfortable all the time. I get to be uncomfortable if my credit card doesn't work right away when I'm in line at the grocery store. So if this is the first point that you feel uncomfortable, please consider yourself lucky and lean into it.
Yes. And we're all in quarantine. We're all self-isolating or whatever we're doing. So this is a safe time if you want to start doing the work.
Absolutely.
Now, can we talk about solidarity statements? Every theater company in the world seems to have, well, almost every theater company seems to have created a solidarity statement. What in these solidarity statements, what's the wording that's kind of getting it right, getting it wrong? What do companies need to be considering when crafting these statements? Because you don't get a hall pass just because you made a nice solidarity. No. So speak to the
direct action.
Yeah.
It is a statement to direct action. It is stating what you are going to do. It is acknowledging what you didn't do, what you're going to do better, and how you are going to do it. And not just say we stand in solidarity with our Black employees and our Black artists. It is, you know what, we do have some pay inequities and we didn't think about that. And we are only hiring Black and brown people in junior positions and not giving them opportunities to move forward in their careers. And we just never thought about it. And that is wrong. And we are sorry. And we're going to show you that we are sorry by doing X, Y, and Z.
And we're going to talk about some of the action steps in a little while. There are some artists in our community who have suggested that perhaps one of the answers is for Black artists, Black theater makers to find a way to divest or to find ways to divest from white institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the solution? Is that part of the answer?
I think that is an answer. It is not the answer, and we're all speaking from different experiences. I absolutely think that should happen. There are not enough Black theater companies. There are not enough theater companies that cater to the experience of people of color in general. I do think that needs to happen. I do not think that is a solution to what is going on here, because I think that absolves white people specifically of their responsibility in dismantling the system itself. And I think we talked about this earlier, even if everything was equal, even if Black institutions got the same amount of money as white institutions. White institutions still have a 400-year head start. Even if they got the same amount of money to do their season, they have a 400-year head start. They have a 400-year head start of everything, name recognition, critical acclaim, all of that. So starting from scratch for any theater company is hard. For a theater company that has a specific point of view of an oppressed people is even harder, because it is very easy to be pigeonholed. Now, what could happen is a white institution could decide, you know what, we're just going to put up all Black playwrights one season. They've done it for women. And I would bet, and I have seen that when we have done the gender parity game and said we're going to do a whole season of plays by women, most of the time they were all white.
Yes. And that in itself is a problem. And even some of our theater companies that are all about parity and gender equity, if you start to really cross-examine some of their boards, they have a board full of white people, which to me is not okay. Don't talk to me about parity and gender equality and all of these other EDI buzz terms unless you're willing to move towards having an inclusive and equitable board, which would include Black female, in that case, Black female artists.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, this has been an issue with mainstream feminism going back ages, right? Like Ida B. Wells had to literally push through the suffragette march because they wanted her to be in the back of it, because they didn't want to deal with racism while they were dealing with misogyny.
And there's a lot of it's interesting when I've spoken to Black artists and we've talked about feminism and feminist issues, many of them have trouble identifying as a feminist, identifying with, even though they're all women's rights, they're all pro gender parity, even the feminism umbrella has systemic problems under that.
That is why womanism exists,
yes.
Right? As a term. That is why intersectional feminism was created as a concept by a Black woman.
We have a question from Facebook. Natasha wants to know, what are your thoughts on those theater companies who have yet to make any type of statement? Is it our job to approach them or let their silence be their response on how they feel about the current climate?
I would say the latter. That is what I've been doing with any brand or company that has refused to acknowledge what is going on and pretend that the status quo is acceptable. It is just an idea of where you want to spend your money. And that being said, running a theater is hard. Finding patrons is difficult, but this is also a good time while we're reassessing how theater works in our community, reassessing the importance of these funds and where they're coming from. Is where the money is coming from important, which gets into a whole conversation on capitalism and the intersection of white supremacy and capitalism, which is a whole other gigantic conversation. But if you are primarily making theater for an older white audience that doesn't want to engage in these issues, so you don't feel like you are able to make a statement about it because you don't want to alienate your audience, you need to think about who your audience is and if that's the audience that you would like to have. Because I can assure you that there's somebody else that's going to buy a ticket. If you are making these big radical pushes, somebody else is going to buy a ticket and take their place.
Yes. And the other thing, going back to a little bit ago when you were talking about Black designers, um, wig people, costume people, tech people, you have to give folks the resources, the same resources as your white counterparts. You cannot
Absolutely.
set um, Black designers, Black directors, you can't set them up to fail by withholding resources.
That happens a lot. So a lot of times you'll have theater companies that will stick a show by a person of color in their season. It's going to be in February. It's going to be
Oh,
during Black History Month. It's going to be Miss Saigon during Asian American Pacific Islander History Month. Um, and they are going to make that the most underfunded show in their season. And they are going to find Black designers and Black tech people, but they're not really going to look, and they are not really going to give the support that's needed. So maybe you do have somebody who doesn't have a ton of experience because people are not being hired to get the experience that they need, but you're also not pairing them with a mentor or somebody to apprentice under. Have that person apprentice under whoever their counterpart is that has experience during the beginning of the season. Say, we really want you to do this show. It's coming up in April. Come shadow this person for these shows and learn how to do what we need you to do.
absolutely. And then you are setting them up for success rather than,
Right.
you know,
But and again, it just speaks to this implicit bias where we think Black people especially can do anything. Like, we are at the same time considered lazy and stupid and violent and oversexed, but also superheroes. For some reason, you can hand us anything and we can make magic out of it. And people just think that that's okay to do for some reason. And it's not. And I think that some of it with folks that are very well-meaning is just not thinking about the sponsorship portion of it, not thinking about, okay, this person might need some help, or this person, or even this person we know has an interest in doing lights. So we're gonna hook them up with our favorite light person and have them work to learn.
in a lot of trades, you used to see apprenticeship programs. We need to go back to that model. That model was
Yes. But and that's because with theater, like with a lot of things, it has become sort of entrenched in this ivory tower academic mentality. When you're looking for people at these big drama schools that have these touted programs, and you have to think about the fact that systemic racism is a layered thing. Who is getting into these schools? Who has access to these programs? Who can afford to go to these programs? It automatically narrows your pool of who you're going to pull from. And even if you're just talking about four-year colleges, you're not looking at Spelman, you're not looking at Morehouse, you're not looking at Hampton, you're not looking at Howard, you're not looking at any of the equally academically rigorous and well-regarded historically Black colleges and universities. So even if we're only looking at four-year colleges, but aside from that, if you want to be a costume designer and you know that's what you want to do, you can be an apprentice. Just like you don't have to go to a four-year school to be a plumber. And that is hard work. And you have to be very smart. And you don't have to go to a four-year college to be an electrician. But there's ways to learn a trade. And a lot of what we are doing are trades.
It sounds like, and some of the interviews I've done, they pointed to our education and our training programs um, black artists that I've interviewed, and they've said that a lot of the systemic problems we have stem from these training programs. And something that shocked me that I'm going to repeat as many times as I do these interviews, because not everybody's watching all these interviews. Um, I was shocked. There's no M Masters of Theater program at any of the historically Black colleges. So
Yeah,
people wanting to get a master's have to go to predominantly white institutions, and there's going to be a lot of inherent biases in those. And
absolutely. And then, but then the question there becomes these very large arts institutions that have the funds to give endowments and grants and scholarships that are specific. They're not giving them, they're not looking at these historically Black colleges and universities and giving them an endowment to have there's the undergraduate theater program at Howard is highly regarded. The undergraduate theater program at North Carolina Central has always been highly regarded. And they don't have the money because nobody is giving them the money to have a master's program or a PhD dramaturgy program. And that is up to the gatekeepers that run the community writ large. And they need to think about why that is. Why do they not see the inherent value in these Black institutions? Why do they not see the inherent value in these underserved communities? And why are they not seeing these underserved communities as untapped resources to make the arts even better?
Last week, there was a lot of discussion on our DU on Stage surrounding funding, that, grant funding goes to top tiered organizations, most of it, and then everybody else is competing for a smaller percentage of funds, which means that your Black theater companies, your Black artists are really only getting a very small piece of
Right.
the funding or a piece of the pie. How can we restructure funding or how in what ways do we need to restructure the way we fund arts institutions and our artists?
So the funding pipeline for arts institutions is really just a microcosm of our own economy, right? Where the people that get a lot of money don't necessarily need all of the money that they're getting, right? The people that don't have to pay a ton of taxes are people that already have $1 billion. And so I think that is a very big economic question. I think that part of it is going to be that some of these white institutions that are mid-tier or lower in terms of funding have to get comfortable with sacrifice. And that is a hard thing to say, and it's a hard thing to sit with, just like we were talking about being uncomfortable earlier. Part of what equity is, and because when we talk about equity and equality, they are different things. So equality just says if I give you $5 and somebody gives you $5 and somebody gives me $5, and that is an equal amount. But equity is taking into consideration, historic oppression, lack of access. And so that does mean, to reach equity, that means that Black and brown institutions sometimes will have to get more because they are catching up to white institutions. If somebody gave you $5 and somebody gave me $5, but you already have $2,500 in the bank, that $5 is not equal.
That is exactly right. And that gives people a tangible way to understand this, because I feel like a lot of the discussions around funding become polarizing because your white institutions don't want to give up their money. That's
And if that's the case, in some instances, if you're talking about institutions that exist in the same community, they can partner together, and everybody can share resources, and everybody can reap the benefits of those resources. And that also means that each institution is exposing itself to a new audience. So everybody wins when we sort of when we go the communist route.
I feel like we are seeing a true uprising in our Black arts community, which I'm so happy to see. My question is, would we be seeing a similar uprising if theaters and arts institutions weren't closed right now and people were working? Do people feel a certain liberation because they're not afraid of losing their jobs? Because right now nobody has a job.
Well, what I will say is this. The reason that people are taking to the streets right now is because they don't have to work 40 hours a week. People are at home, and that's why people are able to protest at all. So I think that that's the case across all arenas. People are at home, and they have time to sit and think about this stuff because what happened to George Floyd is not an anomaly. It's not even the first time it was on camera, right? So something in the air has changed for people to be able to collectivize like this. And I think a big part of it is everybody is at home, nobody can go to work, and also nobody has any money. So there's not a fight about, like, we are breaking down some of these sort of classist barriers in addition to everything else as well.
And a lot of the conversations I've heard have suggested that we can't really talk about racism until we really unpack the issues around classism as well.
Oh, we can. We absolutely can. So racism developed out of classism, right? Because it is a way for the aristocracy to oppress more people. And part of how the capitalist ideal works is that you want what the aristocracy has, and you want approximation to the aristocracy, and you want to be near to them and close to them. And the way that they can continue to have workers under them is to make them feel like there is somebody under them that they are better than.
Mm.
And so once everybody realizes that everybody is under the thumb of somebody that they don't want to be under the thumb of, then that is what threatens the larger system.
We have another question from Facebook. Jeff says his company has never had a mechanism set up to reach out to minorities, despite the fact that he agrees it's their responsibility to do so. So his question is, how does one learn how to conduct outreach, or how do we set up a program to do so? Are there institutions that teach such things?
There certainly are. And also, it's just a matter of sitting and thinking, okay, who do you want to see? Who do you want to reach out to? Because I can assure you that regardless of what group you think of, there is an organizing body that exists that represents that group in your community, and you can develop a relationship with that organizing body.
I think too that a lot of our white institutions or white theater companies have to recognize they cannot figure this out alone.
No.
They just don't have the tools. They need to bring in, and you and I were talking about before we went online about how workshops are not necessarily the answer, but maybe bringing in a mediator, maybe bringing in a facilitator, somebody to help you come up with a long-term strategy, long-term goals. Is that the answer?
Yeah, I mean that's I think that that's a big part of the answer. It's work that I am doing and would be glad to continue to do for anybody that asks. And I think a big part of the answer is having somebody come in and consult, because it's something that can happen on an individual basis. And we can break down some of the personal barriers that are holding people back, right? So you can get away from feeling like you've been called out on the carpet in front of a whole group, and you get away from the feeling that your dirty laundry is being aired out. And we can drill down into more important things like, okay, let's strip away why you feel this way. Why aren't these structures in place? Where are you sourcing your talent from? All of those places. What audience do you even want? Why do you have the audience that you have? Is it the audience that you want? And how are you going to make it different?
And I think too, when people talk about outreach, they often do not um, consult or include the people that they are trying to outreach to. In the
Right.
disability community and the disabled community, there's a lot of discussion about nothing about us without us. I think the same can be said here. Don't start making decisions about outreach or what you think the Black and brown stakeholders in your company or constituents want without consulting them.
Right.
That just kind of makes sense to me.
It makes perfect sense. And I think what happens is a lot of people don't know who to reach out to, right? They don't even know where to begin, but it's cold calling people. Like I said, this comes down to whatever minority exists, there is an organizing body, one or more, in your community that represents these people. If you want to reach out to more Black people, there are plenty of organizing bodies here that deal with the Black community directly. If you want to source more East Asian people, there are plenty of not neighborhood associations, but community associations that exist that you can reach out to. And there's going to have to be some sort of reciprocity there. People aren't going to just do this for you for free, even if it's not, fiscal reciprocity. Something has to be. Are they going to be a sponsor? Are they going to get some sort of advertising out of this? So nobody's going to do this for you for free. I will be glad to do this for anybody that asks, but I am not going to do it for free. But yeah, I think that that's what it comes down to, is you have to talk to people directly, and you have to stop being afraid to talk to people directly, and you have to stop being afraid of saying the wrong thing, because guess what? You're going to.
Well, and I think it's okay to make
Yeah.
mistakes. It's okay to say the wrong thing. It's okay. It's funny. I'm going to say this. We have an Instagram social media agreement, and I'm just going to use myself as an example because I don't want to call other people out, but we've been using this for a while, and it's a template, and every time somebody takes over our social media accounts, we send them this Instagram agreement. And it wasn't until last night, and this Instagram agreement was designed for the 16-year-olds who were taking over our Instagram account. So there were a bunch of teenagers who wanted to take over our Instagram accounts about a year ago. And rather than say no, we created all these rules. We never changed those rules. It's just been a template, and we just sent it out blindly. And it wasn't until last night, after I sent it to you, that I reread it and thought, it doesn't make sense. This wording does not make sense anymore. You can't just, it's not a cookie cutter thing. Aurelia is a grown up. She doesn't need to be told the same rules that a 16-year-old white kid might need to be told. So I think in all our companies, in all our organizations, we have to realize that
No. I do believe Lauren has left us, but let me see if you guys have any questions. And I will answer your questions until she finds her way back. I am. So let's see what questions you guys have for me. So where did we leave off? We left off discussing ways to do, there we go, the ways to do community outreach. But Lauren's back now, so.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
This is why I made you a co-host, so that, you know, when the weather is bad at my house,
Still
and
here. I was having a hard time finding any questions that were being asked because I have 55 different tabs open. But
yes. Okay, so here we go. I there are some more questions. And what I guess I didn't hear what you were saying. But what I was saying is it's okay to trip up, okay to make mistakes, and
yeah,
we just need to own up and say, hey, this wording doesn't even make sense anymore. I need to rephrase it. I need to reword it. And I'm not going to put it on you to reword it for me. I'm going to do the work and then send it back to you. And
it's that simple. It's that simple. And so
perfect.
when people complain about what they call cancel culture, it's because we are not doing that, right? We're not doing that follow through where it's just like, wow, I did or said a really stupid thing and I'm sorry. And you feel like I'm sorry is the end all, right? Like, oh, well, I apologize. So that means everything's okay. But it is what we were talking about earlier with direct action. Like, oh my God, I said this thing. I didn't realize it was offensive. I'm so sorry. I'm going to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And then you show that through your actions.
Through actions, not just statements or signing petitions. That's
right. And you have to remember that nobody ever got canceled over doing one thing wrong.
We have a question from Rebecca. What advice do you have for college theater programs looking to diversify their community?
Go to inner city schools.
Mm.
Go to inner city schools. And like I said earlier, see the inherent value in the student populations there and know that you're going to find somebody that is talented and is a good fit for your program. Why do you feel like, and this is a whole other conversation about schools being governed by property values, but why do you feel like schools in areas with higher property values inherently are going to have better students that are better suited for your particular program? Why am I only seeing outreach at upper middle class or upper class high schools? Why? That's the biggest thing is why aren't you focusing on the communities that you say you want to include more of, because trust and believe that the guidance counselors at those upper middle class high schools already know to recommend their students to you. And the drama teachers that work at those high schools already know to recommend their students to you. And when you get into inner city schools that may not even have arts funding at all, maybe you need to go in and do a little bit of extra legwork so people know you exist and people know that you value them, and so that they will apply to your program. People also don't apply to programs because they feel like they're never going to get in, because they've never seen anybody like them come out of a program like that. And they also don't get any feeling other than a Black person's stock photo face on a brochure that this community institution cares about them.
And to that point, going back to casting, several of the artists of color and Black and brown artists who have sat on our Torn panels the last few weeks, they've said that typically they will not audition for a certain company if they've never seen Black or brown bodies on your stage before. They're just not going to show up to audition. So that's
Right.
the same concept if you're not creating that welcoming space or inclusive space.
Right. Well, and that's what inclusivity is, right? You are making your space feel welcoming to a wide range of people. And that's done with more than just words. It is the fact that I can tell you that I love you, and I can tell you that every day. But if I am abusing you in any way, that doesn't mean anything. Like, love is action, right? And that's also the whole vibe of what is going on here now across the world, is that love is action. I wouldn't be here talking to you. I wouldn't be disseminating resources to white family and friends if I didn't love them and care about them. If I didn't love them, I would just let them go and be ignorant and say, oh, well, that's their problem and not mine.
We have another question from Steve. Can you think of an example, whether local or not, of a previously not very diverse organization that has done a particularly good job of expanding its outreach to people of color? An example of success.
No.
But there's always a first, Steve.
Yeah, so you can be the first one, buddy. I don't know of an example like that. Maybe one exists. I don't know everything. But for the most part, when you see any space that's truly inclusive, it was built that way. And it was built that way because there was a need for it.
We are seeing, it's really interesting to me because I think since George Floyd's murder, we've seen this ebb and flow in the movement. And one thing I seem to be seeing now is this uprising in our Black artist community, and a lot of Black and brown artists calling people out, calling companies out. Nicole Brewer, who was with me last week in one of my interviews, said shaming might be a part of this.
Yeah.
Accountability is a part of it. So can you talk about this reporting, the idea of calling companies out or theater organizations or institutions out? And if you are the theater that has been called out, or you're the institution that's been called out, then what?
So I think that call outs are necessary. I am definitely one of those people that ascribes to the idea of, make racism uncool again, make racists afraid again, because it's not acceptable behavior. Like, you can't You can't do it. And it needs to be completely eradicated as a concept. And it's going to take a really long time because it didn't get here overnight. But yes, I think naming and shaming is going to be part of it. And it's going to have to be part of it because people have tried to do this quietly and nicely for decades on decades. And we are still here today. And so people have tried to put, black faces in high spaces, but that did not dismantle the system as it stood in that institution. And so, yes, people need to be made to feel bad about it sometimes so that they can't push away the idea of, I have Black friends, I have good politics, I read the books, I have a Black partner or spouse. That doesn't mean that you can't be perpetuating systemic racism. Your mission statement saying that you're inclusive doesn't mean that you can't be perpetuating systemic racism. And you obviously don't know when you're doing it, so somebody needs to tell you that. And that's all this is people telling you like what you are doing is not okay. And if you feel badly about that, you should. But the way that you're going to move through those negative feelings is to do better and be better. And how do you do that? When somebody tells you what you did, it's just like any other apology, right? Any other person to person apology. Somebody tells you you've done something to harm them. And you, even if you didn't realize that you did it, you apologize to them and you see how you can rectify it, and you internalize the fact that what you did was wrong, and this is why it was wrong, and this is how you could not do it again.
But what I'm hearing, because I've called a few people out lately, because people have asked my opinion. So don't ask my opinion if you don't want me to call you out.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm not going to coddle. But a few, there was one company last week who whose executive director asked all of her Facebook followers to sign a petition. It's the white actors pledge, the big petition that was going around last week from that like 27,000 people in the Broadway community signed. And I did sign it. I signed it prior to her posting this. But what I found a little hypocritical was her company has no people of color, no Black people on their board. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I sent a private message. I didn't do it publicly. I didn't do a big public shaming. I didn't post it on Facebook. But privately, I reached out to her and I said, listen, to the outside eye, this looks a little bit hypocritical because you're asking me to sign a petition supporting equity and inclusivity, which I absolutely do. However, you yourself are the head of a company that has no Black, Indigenous, people of color on your board. Why is that? And instead of writing me back and saying, you're right, we've screwed up, we are working to do this, this, and this, the answer was, we're in the midst of a pandemic. I'm feeling very anxious. My kid is having a breakdown every day because he doesn't want to be in isolation. And I'm sorry, I don't care. Everyone
that has nothing to do with what's going on here. That's the thing.
So don't give me excuses. Give me action.
Right. And so thinking about it, and it is American individualism. It is, my worldview does not extend beyond as far as I can see in my own home, right? And that has nothing to do with this. Like I said earlier, I have to be in this body every single day, and I have to move through this world in this body every single day. And I have to do it whether there's a pandemic, and I have to do it whether there's a recession, and I have to do it whether I'm sick or not. I have to do it in a hurricane. I have to do it in a box. I have to do it with a fox. I have to do it here and there. I have to do it everywhere. Right. So if I can do it, you certainly can take the time during a pandemic while you're at home and reach out to people. Or if you feel overwhelmed in your own home, there are other people on your board and there are other people on your staff that you can task with this.
And it is important work to be done. It should be at the top of the list.
Correct. And that's the other thing where you feel bad about it, but you're not doing anything about it, so it must not be that important to you.
Yes. I talk a lot about coded language because I'm a writer and I am a language lover. Um, so I want to throw out some terms and get your response, kind of a call and response, because these are terms and words that I've heard from either white theater companies or white artists or white friends and colleagues. And I want to get your response to these words and why this falls under the umbrella of coded language, problematic language. Colorblind.
Fake. Fake made up thing. Doesn't exist. Can't exist.
Fake news people right there.
It can't exist in the system, right? It means something. My being Black means something. Somebody's being South Asian means something. And like I said at the beginning of the show, the only way you can change that is to hop in a DeLorean and go all the way back to 1492 and fight Christopher Columbus. That's the only way you're gonna change anything about that circumstance. Color blindness doesn't exist. Color blindness is how you get stories that don't match their optics. Color blindness is taking a universal story and putting one Black person in it and saying, all right, I am done. And your audience sees it because it means something to your audience. And so then your audience may then project upon that something that you don't want to see. And it's also, I've been watching, there's a show that I've been watching on the Netflix that portrays a sort of idyllic Southern town in a way that feels very inclusive and diverse, but they're continuing to undermine themselves and perpetuate harmful stereotypes because of the three women that are your main characters. One of them is Black, only one of them is Black. She's the only person that interacts with any other people of color in town for the most part. And that's what happens with colorblind casting, because you can't say that racism has not informed your worldview. You can't say that you have zero implicit bias, because if you have an ensemble situation like that and one of your secondary characters is Black because you feel like it enforces your politics, but then nobody else in that show is Black, or they only interact with Black people, or you have a romance and the only two people of color in your cast are the two people that get together because for some reason melanin can only see melanin, right? It's all of those things. Like, you cannot say that implicit bias doesn't inform your worldview. That is how it has gone on for so long. So colorblind casting is fake. It doesn't exist.
And I'm going to say by extension, because we don't only talk about the theater at our DU on Stage class. Recently, we've been talking about a lot of things, but when my children were younger, my husband and I, as we were raising them, we used to say, oh, isn't it wonderful? We are raising our children to not see color. I'm sorry, parents, that's bullshit. Your children do see color, and it's okay to talk to them about race.
Yeah,
And
it's huge. It's a huge, huge thing, because if you don't talk about it, they're going to hear about it out in the streets, and they might end up coming home with something that you don't want them to.
yes,
That's
yes.
how kids that have been raised in extremely progressive, crunchy granola households come home saying the N word because their parents never talked about why it was a bad thing.
Yep. Okay, so next word, piggybacking on colorblind, color conscious.
Sure, yeah, that's real. That is a
Okay.
real thing that exists.
And what does
Um,
that mean for theaters?
so, color conscious casting is exactly what it sounds like. It is purposely disrupting the visual status quo and putting people of color in predominant roles on your stage. And I think it's great. And you can pretend that it is a quota problem, but that there's no quotas, right? And you are just pushing against the common idea that white people are the default, or white people are more valuable, or are more talented, or whatever. You are actually casting a wide net and casting the best person for the role. And honestly, if you feel like you're not casting the best person for the role, that's a problem. If you feel like none of the people of color that have walked into your audition are the right person for a particular role, that's a problem with your outreach and your engagement, and where you're sourcing your actors from.
And I also think I've had a few interviews where we've talked about color conscious casting. When you're making these color conscious decisions, you have to think about how that is affecting the narrative.
Yes,
Or
absolutely.
you got to take that into consideration. And oftentimes, you know, like with Bright Star at NC State last summer, I thought their color conscious casting decisions actually made the piece far more interesting than had it been an all white cast.
Right. You're doing things on purpose to disrupt the narrative. Right. That's color conscious casting. You're doing things on purpose to disrupt the narrative. You're doing Romeo and Juliet with an Asian Juliet and a black Romeo to disrupt the narrative. You are doing the entire 1990s Cinderella with Brandy and Whitney Houston, which is the best version of it, and you're doing it on purpose to disrupt the narrative, and to also sit and proclaim that this is make believe, and we can do whatever we want to do. And Victor Garber and Whoopi Goldberg can have a Filipino son if they want. And also, let me backtrack. Not even that. Not even about it being make believe, because it might not be. Whoopi Goldberg and Victor Garber can have a Filipino son if they want to, because they can adopt a Filipino son if they want to. And it's getting rid of this idea that families have to look a certain way, right? None of our families look a certain way. And it is doing things like that purposely disrupt the narrative. And I think it can add a lot to a show, just like you were talking about with Bright Star, because if you are making these decisions consciously, then your audience is seeing what you want them to see, as opposed to making these decisions willy-nilly, and then it gives space for your audience to project something that you did not mean.
Okay, this next one I find crazy, but you know, we for a long time we talked about the whitewashing of West Side Story, and I cannot even believe this was a conversation recently, but the whitewashing of Hairspray. So let's talk about whitewashing. How can
Wait,
you
somebody
cast
did
hair?
that's something that somebody did? Somebody did that?
Um, the creators of Hairspray had to clarify recently that you cannot cast white people in the black parts.
that wasn't clear about the whole racism of Hairspray.
Yeah. Apparently not, because they had to clarify it in the writer to
That's
that.
see, that's what happens when you raise colorblind children. But so what I will say is, for my part, I have definitely not taken roles more than one time because I felt like I wasn't the appropriate person for that role. And I know everybody doesn't choose that. I know because here we don't have a tendency to go into auditions for roles, right? We go to audition for a show and they put us where they want to put us. And I have definitely been put places where I felt like we're not correct. I felt like we're perpetuating colorist stereotypes or racist stereotypes, and I then refused to do the show. And I think that that's going to be part of the sacrifice we were talking about earlier, and part of the uncomfortable things that we were talking about earlier, because some of them are really good roles, but I was like, what I'm not going to do is play this colorism game. Somebody else can do that in my stead. But whitewashing and Hairspray, oh my goodness.
I will share on the Torn. If you guys are watching and you are not part of our Torn Facebook group, anybody can join that. I will post the information there tonight. You all can talk about that. I'm not making this up.
So a theater company is okay.
More than one.
More than one.
They had to do a writer now explaining this.
And this is and did they explain themselves? Did these perpetrators explain themselves as to why this happened?
I don't know about that. All I saw was the response. Again, we're being reactive, not proactive, but the reaction was we're going to place a writer in or a clarifier in the script when you buy the rights that says you have to cast this as written. Which
so part of this is definitely an issue of you need to do shows that you know you can do, like, and this is mostly speaking to like high schools and colleges that have a bit of a restriction on their casting pool. You have to choose shows that you can do. You can't do West Side Story at an all-white high school, because then we are looking at theater not as art but just as something to do. Being Latino is part of the story of West Side Story, and if you're just doing it to do it, you're not gleaning what the playwright or the composer or the book writer wants you to glean from it. You're not learning anything from it. And this is especially true in learning institutions. What are your students learning if you're telling them you can step into the shoes of a Puerto Rican in the 50s and understand what their life was like? Mm-hmm. You can't do it. You can't do Hairspray that has an extremely political. Well, both of the A story and the B story are both extremely political, but this is also something that people don't do with roles that aren't people of color. So you would never cast thin Tracy Turnblad. I know people have done it and they put her in a fat suit and it was bad when they did it too, but there was more of an outcry over that. You wouldn't do that, and you wouldn't think twice about not doing that. So what is it? And then this is how we get into the inherent value of Blackness and Black people. So you don't feel that Blackness or Black people are valuable enough and this story that we're telling is not valuable enough to be told as is. And somebody was talking about they did a production of The Mountaintop and tried to make Martin Luther King white, which is one of the most insane things I've ever heard in my life. But they were like, this is the theater, we can do whatever we want to do. And it's like, it's Martin Luther King, it's not a dragon, it's a real person. And you have to honor that. And also, again, you have to honor it, even if we're doing a total like completely artistic rehash and a different person plays Martin Luther King in every scene. They are all going to have to be Black, because that's just where we are as a society. We haven't progressed past the point of needing to hear Black stories out of Black mouths. We're not there yet. And I'm sorry if you feel like it's taking too long, then you need to contribute to speeding it up.
All right, next word I want to talk about, because this seems to be, people are confused. A lot of people are referring to Black and brown people as people of color. There is a difference, or at least from what I understand, there is a difference. So can you clarify this for people, because I don't want to hear anybody else telling me about POCs.
Okay, so for me personally, and I like, language is an ever-changing thing, and so this is just from what I know to be true. But you need to be intentional. That's what it comes down to, is being intentional. And if you're talking about something specific, you need to be specific about it. Every time I've said Black people, I'm talking about Black people. Every time I've said people of color, I'm talking about all of the people of color that could exist, right? But if you mean Black people, you need to say Black people. If you mean Black and Latino people, you need to say that. If you mean Indigenous people, you need to say that, because all of those histories and all of those experiences are different. And most especially in the West and in Western countries that have a history of imperialism, genocide, slavery, you have to give deference to those histories. You have to give deference and acknowledge the fact that Black and brown bodies are the bodies in this country, be they black bodies or brown Latino bodies, brown Indigenous bodies, that get paid the least, have worse health outcomes, get killed by the police more. Like, that is specific to Black and brown people. That is not just people of color, which we can talk about anti-Blackness across the board, where anti-Blackness is something that does exist across all people of color. There is specific anti-Blackness about viewing Black people in a certain way, because imperialism is a worldwide phenomenon, and Western imperialism has informed the culture of many countries across the world, even countries that are not predominantly white. But it's also within certain countries and nationalities and ethnic groups, people that are darker, people that are more melanated, are looked down upon more, even if they are not of the African diaspora. So mean what you say. All of that to say, mean what you say. If you're talking about all of us, talk about all of us. If you're talking about one type of person, if you're talking about Asians, say that. If you're talking about East Asians specifically, say that. If you're talking about Southeast Asians, say that. If you're talking about South Asians, say that. If you're talking about Middle Eastern people, say that. If you're talking about North African people, say that. If you're talking about Black North African people who have a different experience than phenotypically Arab North African people, you need to say that and not feel bad about saying that. This is how we've gotten into a whole weird thing a few years ago where everybody was African American, even if they weren't from America. Any Black person that somebody saw, they would say that they were African American because they were scared to say black, because they felt like that was not the right word to say. But if that's what you're talking about, then say it. It's not a slur. Don't say the slurs, but just say the words.
And it's okay to say black and brown people. It is
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, it is okay to say black and brown people if you're talking about black and brown people. It's okay to say people of color if you're talking about people of color. The newer term, which works better written than it does said, is BIPOC, which is Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, which is just another way to say people of color, but give deference to Black and Indigenous people. Which again, like you can read it better than you can sort of throw it in a conversation.
Yes. But and I'm glad you said it, because I think there's a lot of terms being thrown at white people right now, and I'm happy to say I don't know what all the terminology means. I'm smart enough to use Google and look it up and try to figure it out. And then if I have questions, I will ask my Black friends. But I think we have to be proactive in looking. If you see words that don't make sense, or you're not sure what something means, look it up. A friend of mine called me before you and I went live, and she was talking about one of the theaters and their solidarity statement, and their artistic director had come out and made some sort of video. And in that video, she never said Black Lives Matter. And this person was very upset that in the video, in their solidarity video and their solidarity statements, they said nothing about Black Lives Matter. So I want to clear up for folks, and probably most of the people on this particular chat watching. These are not the people who need to hear this, but we're just going to put it out there anyway. Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter.
What's the difference?
Yeah, unpack that for people, because I think there's people out there who don't understand it. So we're just going to rip the Band-Aid off and talk about it.
Okay. So All Lives Matter is fake. It doesn't exist. It as a term was invented to push back against Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, if you want to talk about it in terms of when people say for colored girls versus for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow wasn't enough, right? It's Black Lives Matter, and Black lives won't matter, and all lives don't matter until Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Right? We say Black Lives Matter because it is a reminder that they do, right? It is people have to be reminded that the initial conception of it, people needed to be reminded that Black bodies did not deserve to be killed by the police. That is where that came from. So you can't say all lives matter, because they don't. Black and brown people still make less on the dollar. Black and brown people still get killed by the police more. Black and brown people still have worse health outcomes. They still have less generational wealth. They still have less of a chance to get a bank loan or get a job. So no, all lives don't matter. And they won't matter until Black lives do.
Yes. And I would challenge my white friends, my white colleagues, if you are a white parent, this is what I want to challenge you. When I saw what happened in Atlanta the other day, I have a 21-year-old son, and I am, the minute he turned 21, he was very excited to go get a drink and go to a bar. And I imagined that night, as I was watching the news unfold, if my white 21-year-old son was sitting in the drive-through at Wendy's and he was drunk and he fell asleep, would he have received the same treatment? And the answer
is no.
No,
So
the answer.
here's a great example. Rayshard Brooks was killed doing exactly what you described. Brock Turner spent not 3 months in jail for an eyewitness rape.
Yep.
So that's the difference.
And that's what white people have to look at when they're looking at these stories on the news, not just, oh, this is awful, but do your research and look at other cases and see what's happening. And that's when you begin to understand.
Yeah. So Dylan Roof got to go to Burger King after killing 9 people, but Breonna Brown can't sleep in her own home.
An essential worker.
Yes, an EMT cannot sleep in her own home. But even aside from that, so like none of these people that we have been talking about for the last several decades, but very intensely for the past just about decade, right? We always qualify why they did not deserve to be killed. And it doesn't need a qualification. That is the other part of saying Black Lives Matter. They don't need a qualification. It doesn't matter if Breonna Brown was an EMT or a sex worker. She didn't deserve to die. Yes. None of these people, whether they were doing crime or not, didn't deserve to die, especially when you're talking about and comparing to white killers, serial killers, mass murderers that are sitting in jail right now because they were taken in alive.
Look at your school shootings. I don't see a lot of Black and brown people doing the school shootings. So just that, you don't even have to look at bringing it back to theater companies. What are some action items that our predominantly white companies and institutions can do to be proactive rather than reactive at this moment?
Let me actually take myself back a little bit because I misspoke. So I keep saying Breonna Brown because I'm thinking about somebody else, but Breonna Taylor.
Yeah, yes.
Who, by the way, her killers are still not in jail.
They're out there.
Wild to think about. But yes, Breonna Taylor, who still has not received any sort of justice, even though there's a law named after her, even though they haven't arrested anybody that was responsible for her death. But yes, action items. Number one, it's just evaluate the makeup of your board, evaluate the makeup of your administration staff, evaluate the people in your company who are salaried and who are freelance. Because that's another thing. If all of your salaried employees are white, but you only call in people of color when you need them, that's a whole other situation, right? That is not equity. That is not pay parity. That is none of that. Evaluate your season. Evaluate where you are sourcing your materials from. Evaluate your audience and decide if that is the audience that you would like to serve, or if there is a different audience that you would like to serve, and then do the requisite engagement to be able to have audiences that look like what you would like for them to look like. And sit with your discomfort and sit with the fact that you may have to sacrifice. You may have to not be in the spotlight at one point or another. And sit with the fact that somebody making the proper amount of money, even if it's what you make or more than what you make, has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with you. And understand that equity and inequality are different things. And it means that you're going to have to do more work to achieve equity in your companies. It's going to be hard, and it's going to feel like something that you don't want to do. And honestly, evaluate your friend circles. Evaluate the people that you receive love and care from, and evaluate the people that you listen to. Evaluate your bookshelf. Are you reading works from Black or Brown people? Are you, when you are reading new works especially, are you looking at who is writing them? Are you only doing classics when you do Black works? Have you done a Black work that was written in the last 15 years? Are you making space for unpublished Black playwrights? Mm-hmm. Are you seeking out people? Are you going to festivals? Are you trying?
And are you trying consistently? Because somebody I interviewed the other night, she said, I'm not interested in what people do next season, because right now it's very PC to stack your seasons right now. But she was more interested in what's going to happen in the 21-22 season, 22-23 season. That's going to be the telling thing, not what you do today. What are you doing 2 years from now?
And right now is a great time to do some direct action, even if it's outside of that. I mean, do web-based content. And honestly, this is a great time to diversify your revenue streams so you don't feel locked into your season pass subscribers if you feel like those people are not representative of the audiences that you want to have, and if you feel like those people are holding you back from doing the kind of work that you would like to do, which is a whole, like, why you feel beholden to please them because they're paying, I don't know. They'll show up or they won't, and that is not your responsibility. But this would be a great time to figure out ways to diversify your revenue streams so that you don't have to worry about that.
And I think people underestimate the power of the patron. So if you're a patron of a predominantly white theater company and you would like to see more diverse stories, I think you can pick up the phone or write a letter or send an email, whatever that looks like. But I think patrons and audiences also need to take it upon themselves to.
I definitely agree with that. Find new ways, like jump into the digital space. Do some audio dramas. Use that as a way to find new folks to work with. Take this time to troll through social media and find people that inspire you that might be great designers that maybe don't have the resume, and you can introduce them to other folks that might be able to help them build their skills. Do all of that and sit with all of that, and honestly sit with why you didn't do it. Like, don't do this because I'm telling you to do it or because somebody made you feel bad on the internet. You need to do it because it is the right thing to do. And the more you do it and the more you sit with that discomfort and it is no longer discomfort, then it will be part of your thinking. You don't have to think twice about it because you do value Black and brown bodies and it is ingrained in your head. And so then it doesn't have to keep being like, oh, am I doing this right? I need to find somebody to fill this role, because at some point you will get to the point where the entirety of your circle is representative of the diversity in this country. And you don't have to think about it anymore.
Do you think we're going to see more stories written by people of color on the other side of this moment, on the other side of this pandemic? The question I used to ask people like 2 months ago, which seems like 2 years ago, was, are we going to see a lot of pandemic plays on the other side of this pandemic? Now my question is, are we going to start seeing a lot of contemporary stories written by our Black and brown artists?
Do you mean new ones that are written during this time, or do you mean
Yes.
that people are actually going to take the time and find the ones that already exist?
Well, either. I think there's plenty that already exist. And if you don't think there are, Aurelia put a list of artists on my Instagram. She's taken over Instagram today. And so you could go on the RDU Instagram page and look up some of the artists that she's put out. But new work, I'm particularly interested in new work.
The question is, are these theater companies going to try and nurture that? It's because people write plays all the time, but people are not giving them away for free, right? So if you're not, people of color, Black people in particular, do a lot of physical labor and emotional labor for free. Black people are teaching people across the internet right now for free. Telling me you're going to do my play because you want to give me exposure does not pay my light bill. And when you start thinking about either commissioning new works from people or going ahead and purchasing rights to some newer works, you need to think about, are you paying this person? If this person were white, even better, if this person were a white man, would you be paying them this stipend? And look at your past seasons and look at what you paid across the board for different productions. And obviously there are classic playwrights that are long dead that have entire estates that fight for how much their rights should be. And I'm not telling you that you need to pay me, a 33-year-old, what you're going to pay for, I don't know, Edward Albee's play, which, I mean, you should, but I'm not telling you have to do that. But I do expect you to pay me the same as what you would pay a contemporary white man. I do expect you to pay me that. I do expect to make what you would pay for a Neil LaBute play at this point. And I would expect that for any other person that is writing that type of play.
And the same with your directors and your designers.
Yeah. What did you pay your last costume designer? That's what you need to pay this one. Mm-hmm. For that type of show. Obviously, I understand that a black box show is going to be different than a big, splashy spectacle. But did you pay the costume designer, the white costume designer that did your last big, splashy spectacle? Are you paying this black designer that's going to do your next one the same amount of money? And are you giving them the same amount of resources? Or are you saying you're going to have to work from our costume room? We can't afford for you to go out and buy anything.
Yeah. Resources.
Or saying we can't afford for you to go out and buy anything, but we also don't have any appropriate wigs. So we're going to allow your black actors to go on stage looking any kind of way when you wouldn't do that in a different show. You wouldn't do that. I'm trying to think of like a big wiggy white play.
Well, even if you think of going back to the Hairspray example, that's a wiggy play. I mean, your white folks have to wear wigs in that play. So, yeah.
Yeah, so why not do Caroline or Change in the same manner that you would do Hairspray? It's the same era.
Yeah. Well, and there's, then there's a whole other conversation to be had about why we don't see Caroline or Change more often on stage.
There is a whole conversation about that. Also, I am available for commissions, or if you would like to buy a production of A Doll's House Remodeled, I am glad to talk to you about that.
And those reviews were critically acclaimed reviews last year when that production was done. So I'd love to see it again because I didn't catch it at that time. So somebody do it.
And
So
that was a production that, you know, I Am Black, directed and co-written by Jamaica Holloway Burrell, also Black, starring a Black woman. There were no white women in the show, and that is shocking for contemporary theater. And that was something that was color consciously cast. The white men in that cast were white because they were meant to be white, because it had something to do with the context of the show.
what somebody asked me this question on Facebook the other day, and I don't have the answers, but I'm going to start trying to explore what the answers might be. What does an anti-racist theater landscape look like? And is that even something that is attainable?
It means you don't do Showboat anymore. But no, it means exactly what we were talking about today. It means really getting in on those direct actions, and it means continuing to do it. It means not just doing it for one season because everything happened this year. It means doing it all the time, and that's the deal with this movement too. Like what, the Freedom Rise is 7 months long or something like that. Like, movements are not short. This is going to go on. You can't just get bored and get tired of dealing with it in quarantine and then decide that it's time to move on to something else. You can't do one season that front facing appears to be equitable and then not do it again. And sometimes it's going to mean having entire seasons that have no white playwrights or no white leads. And it's going to feel weird, but it's going to happen sometimes if you're really doing things in an consciously anti-racist way and seeing value in all types of people. And you can't feel bad about it because, again, 400-year head start, really, really going on. So that one season is not going to make or break. It might make or break a couple of season pass subscribers, but did you want their money? I personally love taking people's money and then doing it, and then doing something that then will make them absolutely roll over in their graves when they die. I love doing that. I love doing upsetting things with racist money. Yes. So if that's what you want to do, see if they'll keep paying you to do it.
Well, and I love and I guess it was something you posted on our Instagram page today. And it's something that I've heard echoed in workshops I've taken and heard Black playwrights speak. Um, Audiences don't have to feel comfortable when they go to the theater. It's okay for your audience to feel uncomfortable. And I think we have to get to a point where we are okay having audiences feel uncomfortable.
So, you know, the point that we got when we got to the point where we felt like audiences needed to get to be comfortable is the point in which it was mostly upper crusty people coming to the theater. And that was not always the case. The theater used to be a very populist measure, right? Mm-hmm. Shakespeare's plays aren't comfortable. They deal with a lot of wild stuff. People also try to treat it like lauded classical such and such. And really it was just like soapy trash for everybody, because everybody wanted to watch soapy trash. Like, that's just like we do now. We wanted Macbeth is scandal. You know, Romeo and Juliet is something on the CW. And it's just stories. But there was a point that came, and I am not an official dramaturg, so I can't tell you exactly at what point in history this happened. But people rich people started coming to the theater, and it became a rich people's endeavor. And so it became a place to make rich people comfortable. I mean, the WGA was because of the theater. Like, workers' rights happened because of the theater. All sorts of things got pushed forward because of the theater. Trust me, Othello made plenty of people uncomfortable.
Do you think with the success of shows like Jeremy O. Harris's A Slave Play last season that we are seeing, or we're going to see, a shift in Black stories on our mainstream stages like Broadway?
No.
So
I wish I were more optimistic. But this has happened before. And unless something actually changes, it will continue to happen. I mean, I've talked far and wide about slave play and how Jeremy O. Harris has been treated and the content of the show itself. And I want to get to a place where slave play is not a dangerous play. I want to get to a place where you can show slave play to anybody, and it's not going to make the audience feel so comfortable as to do things that they don't need to do, right? I want to get to a point where slave play is seen as one person's perspective and not representative of the entirety of Blackness, right? The people are going to slave play to learn. People are not going to slave play. White people especially are not going to slave play to be entertained. They're going to leave there and feel like they've learned something, when really that is a deeply personal show that is specifically about Jeremy O. Harris's perspective and whatever he's working through in his life. And it is not meant to be some sort of racial teaching tool. And it is being treated like a racial teaching tool. And it's also part of a long history of lauding Black trauma as art, which is what we see a lot of. It seems that for a lot of Black playwrights, we can either be big and entertaining or very just tragic. I would love to see more shows that are about every people, and those every people just happen to be Black and brown. I think theater can be a teaching tool and should be a teaching tool, but I think in the context of anti-racism, I think it is a way to not pay Black people for their time and their work. And it's a way to absolve white people of their part in the system, because they can go and watch a show and say that was very sad and that was horrible and it should have never happened. And I can't believe we used to be like that. And then they can walk out of the theater and never think about it again.
It's true. Because to your point, you live in your skin every single day. You can't shed it, and
No. And not to, there are obviously playwrights or playwright peers, Mike Wiley, who uses theater as an excellent teaching tool, but that's what he's doing. He's doing that on purpose. What happens more often than not is a play that is written because it is somebody's art. They are working through something within themselves that is highly personal, is then seen as, okay, this is how I'm going to understand Black people. Or somebody saw a deeply sad play about a Black person and they call every Black person they know and apologize to them, even though they have nothing to do with it.
Well, and it speaks to this one size fits all mentality. If you're speaking about Black people, you're one Black person. You're one Black woman, and you're very smart and you're intelligent, but it's not a monolith. It's
No,
not.
I'm not. I am not Shaka Khan. I am not every woman. It is not all in me, unfortunately, but I do try my best.
I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to chat with me. Some people have been very critical of the crazy white woman having conversations about race live on Facebook. But my belief is if I can do it and I can ask the questions and we can have this type of dialogue, then anybody can. So this is what conversation looks like. Let's do more
Yep.
of this.
Do it. Do it more. Having conversations like this is also a way for, white folks to get informed and then take that to other white folks, because I can't be in every community. I can't be everywhere. Black people can't be everywhere all the time, no matter what Bagger Vance told you. It's not true. Uh, and you have to take some of the responsibility on with the knowledge that you gain and take that into your own communities and try to create change. There are things that there are certain people that are going to receive what you say better than they're going to receive what I say. And you cannot depend on Black and brown people to do all of that labor for you, which is not to say like there's been a ton of great books that have been on the New York Times bestseller list because people are going out and buying a lot of great literature. But if there's something that you don't understand, obviously ask. Doing the work does also mean reaching out and asking for help and figuring out what something means and how it affects you and all of that good stuff. But when you have solid knowledge, you have to take on some of that responsibility. That's part of what the movement is. You have to take on some of that responsibility. And we are not going to fully progress to a place where everybody is equal until that happens, right? Like civil rights wasn't attained just by Black people. There were white people that did the work and took the message into their own communities, but also publicly gave deference to the Black voices that were the crux of this experience. But civil rights, Martin Luther King spoke to workers' rights. And the reason that it became something that was extremely racial was because the people that were getting paid the least and the people that were doing the most hard labor were Black. And so it was just mostly Black people there, but there were workers' rights. The speech that he gave, I'm sure we all know, the speech that he gave right before he was assassinated was to a mostly white audience of waste management workers. And that is what scares people the most. What scares people the most is when white folks get into it and learn, and not just white folks, just solidarity across the board is what's going to affect the most major change. And I am not saying that, and I have not and will not coddle anybody to make them feel good about, oh, you're doing the right thing by being part of the movement. It's something that you have to do because it's the right thing to do. And I can't remember the Zora Neale Hurston quote off the top of my head, but no, it might have been Lorraine Hansberry actually that said, existence, like this is what will kill existence. Is man killing man fighting against man is what's going to kill existence. Like this has to stop. It's not sustainable. And that's what we're seeing right now. This is hopefully a watershed moment to talk about how the class system, how the capitalist system, and how the white supremacist system and patriarchal system is not sustainable. it can't, it's not going to live through a pandemic. It's not sustainable.
Well, thank you. If you tuned in late, this will live on Facebook. It'll be posted on our website as well. You can find the complete conversation there. Aurelia, you still have a little bit of time on my social media platform. So if you haven't been on our Instagram today or yesterday, Rebecca Jackson Artist took over yesterday. There's some lovely content on RDU on Stage. Tomorrow, Shonda Branch is taking over our social media accounts. So we're going to keep passing the mic and sharing the mic. And tomorrow night at 7:30, we have our weekly Torn Theater on Racist Negativity panel. Their focus tomorrow night is going to be education. So Shonda Branch will be moderating. Come back and tune in for that. Thank you, Aurelia. This has been wonderful. I hope to see Piece of Clay when and it comes to fruition. I can't wait to see that. I very excited about the new Colossus. Tamara Kassane's one of my favorite people, and I know you worked on that audio drama. So if you're missing theater, listen to the new Colossus. And what other projects? Somebody asked us on Facebook, what other projects are you involved in that people can kind of keep up with?
Right now, I mean, the new Colossus is the most recent thing, so definitely check that out. I'm sure to be doing a lot more audio dramas. And if anybody wants to contract me out for diversity and inclusion consulting or to write them a show, I am widely available. So I am in the house like everybody else during coronavirus. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, I've been on the RDU on Stage Instagram, but you're welcome to follow me at Aurelia_Nicole. It's mostly life and also anti-racism and a lot of fun stuff, but I am around.
Well, thank you. And we will put all the links to your social media handles so people can find you. I hope people will reach out to you. Our theater companies will reach out to you for the consulting work because this is how the work's going to get done. And now is a great time because none of us are, there is no theater. You're not producing anything. So let's do the work now. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I will see you tomorrow evening. And Aurelia, I just appreciate you. Thank you.
Glad I could be here. Thank you.
We will talk soon. Stay safe and healthy.